Yo, welcome to the Power Hour, everyone. Good to see ya. Excuse me. We've got some excellent videos to react to today. I want to talk about Russiagate a little bit and how Russiagate laid the groundwork for the Democrats to push their proxy war in Ukraine, how it allowed them to scapegoat and demonize Russia for 4 years while Trump was in office, so that as soon as another Democratic administration came to power, they could immediately begin pushing their proxy war against Russia. And recently, Gray Zone journalist Max Blumenthal confronted Rachel Maddow over her coverage and pushing of the Russiagate conspiracy. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Steele dossier a little bit, which is basically a plot cooked up by the Clinton campaign to associate Trump with Russia and fearmonger about Russia and claim that Trump is basically a Manchurian candidate controlled by Russia. And then we'll also, if we have time and energy, I'll react to this video from one of these animated geopolitics channels talking about the connection between Russia, China, and Iran. Because it's not a terrible video. Like, there's good information in it, but there's a lot of ideological stuff in there. Anti-China and anti-Iran stuff just shoehorned in there. So we'll talk about that today as well. The Power Hour is here. How's it going, everybody? I did 150 pull-ups this morning to get ready for the Power Hour to make sure it's a very powerful show. So thank you all for being here. We'll get right into it after the intro. What's up, everybody? Glad to have you with us today. So for those who aren't caught up on the Steele dossier, Russiagate stuff, it's basically been proven at this point that it was a big old conspiracy theory cooked up by the Democrats to try and win the election in 2016, because Hillary Clinton was a notoriously, famously unpopular candidate and was having a really hard time garnering support, even in the Rust Belt in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, that traditionally had gone Democrat, that ended up flipping to Trump and ultimately flipping the election. So finally, like 8 years later, at least, the Democrats, some Democrats and some people in the liberal establishment have finally admitted, okay, Russiagate was a hoax. There was never anything connecting Trump to Putin and Russia. Showing that Trump was basically a puppet of the Kremlin. So even CNN published this, the Steele dossier, a reckoning. So just to catch people up, people who aren't up to date on the Russiagate stuff and the Steele dossier, will watch.
It didn't happen, and it was gotten by opponents of ours.
Nearly 5 years since the Steele dossier first emerged publicly, federal prosecutors have laid out a clearer picture of the role well-connected Democratic insiders played in the narrative surrounding Donald Trump's ties to Russia. 2 special counsel investigations, numerous congressional inquiries, and an internal review by the Justice Department have given weight to suspicions that the so-called Steele dossier was used by some Democrats as a political weapon against Trump.
It was a group of opponents that got together, sick people, and they put that crap together.
An ongoing probe by special counsel John Durham investigating the FBI's 2016 Russia probe is pulling back the curtain on some flimsy and potentially biased sourcing in the dossier that was put together by former British spy Christopher Steele. Steele has defended his work, telling ABC News in a recent
I mean, why wouldn't the left just trust everything that a British spy has to say, right? Like, so many leftists bought into this Russiagate narrative because it made Trump look bad without actually looking into, the sourcing and looking into whether or not it was true, the information that was coming out, or whether the source was a British spy who was ultimately getting his information from the Clinton campaign, which, spoiler alert,
tell-all interview, it was raw intelligence that needed further vetting, but that his sources were solid.
There wasn't one key source, I would say. There was perhaps one key collector.
But Durham now says that collector was not a deep-seated Kremlin source, but instead a Russian citizen living in Virginia, Igor Danchenko. He now faces charges for lying to the FBI in interviews about where he got information that ended up in the dossier. Prosecutors say some of the information Danchenko fed to Steele came directly from longtime Democratic operative Charles Dolan, identified as PR Executive 1.
So you catch that? They said this information was coming from Russia, and it was coming from a Russian guy in West Virginia who was emailing back and forth with this Clinton campaign guy. So this Clinton guy was feeding information implicating Trump and claiming, or saying that Trump was controlled by the Kremlin and Putin and Russia, and then feeding it to this random Russian guy in West Virginia, who was then giving the information to Christopher Steele, this British spy, who was then publishing the information, claiming that it was the smoking gun, it was the proof that Trump was associated with Russia or controlled by Russia. So just a convoluted plot by the Clinton campaign and the Democrats to subvert democracy and win the election. And no, this isn't me saying that I support Trump, but we can acknowledge that the Democrats basically did everything that they could to rig the election against them, which is a subversion of democracy. Be sure to like and share the stream, by the way. I guess YouTube didn't give people a notification that we were live, so it would help if you could like and share. Actually, I'm going to pause 1 second and share the stream on Twitter so that we can kind of combat and share the stream lack of notifications there. Perhaps YouTube is suppressing our great Marxist content. Now I've tweeted a link. By the way, I hope you guys like the thumbnail for today. I've taken a page out of the corporations book. I'm going to start using like the pride imagery to market Midwestern Marx. Except, unlike the corporations, we're not just going to market it to you so that we can take your money. We advocate for the liberation of all working class LGBTQ people.
Okay.
All right, so I forgot to explain what this is. So Max Blumenthal of the Gray Zone confronted Rachel Maddow, who is one of the main people promoting the Steele dossier, the fake Steele dossier, who never apologized for promoting and pushing something that was just blatantly wrong, blatantly fake, manufactured by the Clinton administration or the Clinton campaign to try and subvert democracy. Never apologized for pushing that and getting tons of Americans to believe it, getting tons of Americans to develop this Russophobic anti-Russia sentiment, which is now being used to push the proxy war in Ukraine and get thousands of people killed. So Blumenthal went up and confronted her as she was doing some speaking engagement that I'm sure she was very well paid to do, to go up and talk nonsense. And I think it is interesting, and I think it was a good thing to do. Shout out to Blumenthal for this.
Thanks for holding it down, Aaron.
Well, thanks for confronting the top liar in the country about a Trump-Russia conspiracy. Someone who's done so much to indoctrinate millions of people into believing these collusion fantasies, and accordingly inculcating in people this belief that we need to confront Russia, because that's really been, I think, the main consequence of Maddow's conspiracy theories. It wasn't just a dumb political thing going after Trump. This really was a McCarthyite campaign, and she to me is the face of it. And so this is the first time today, Max, I was just saying, that she's ever been confronted about it. So thank you for doing that.
That's the thing, is this also fits this propaganda piece. It's not just an attack on Trump. It also fits in with the U.S.'s broader imperialist strategy, which we know the Clinton campaign is very close to, and they're one of the most well-connected and powerful political dynasties in the country. And they've been heavily involved with the proxy war in Ukraine and pushing this new Cold War against Russia and China. So this Russiagate conspiracy wasn't just a way to attack Trump and subvert democracy. It did do that. But it also was a way to push anti-Russia rhetoric. So it fits in perfectly with the broader imperialist project that the U.S. and the political establishment the Clintons are a part of have going on right now. I was thinking there was something different about the thumbnail. Couldn't quite define it. I'm glad you liked it, Ross. Well, if you liked it. I guess you just said it was different. You didn't say whether you liked it or not. But either way, appreciate the 10 euros. Thank you so much, Ross. Check out Ross's Substack. Gabor Mate's face really shows in Aaron's. Yes, it does. Yes, they look very similar. Check out Aaron's dad, Gabor Mate. He's a great psychologist.
Yeah, what does that say about our media culture? I mean, she goes on Bill Maher all the time. She's on all these talk shows outside of her own domain in MSNBC, and she never has to answer for this. Just years and years of lies that laid the groundwork for the proxy war with Ukraine and drove millions of good-hearted Americans totally insane and turned them into frothing out the mouth, warmongering, rabid McCarthyites. And so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to confront her about that. Obviously, she wasn't going to do Q&A. She was going to sit down with someone from the Truman Center to softball her. So she was building up for the waterworks part of her speech. Like, this is why this matters, and I'm bringing it all home. And I confronted her. And Aaron, I think you can give some background on her lies, that you were one of the first people to write.
And do people see how our media establishment works? Maddow's supposed to be a journalist or a reporter, and she's doing this well-paid, cushy speaking engagement for the Truman Foundation or the Truman Center, some political think tank or NGO. Like, who do you think is funding these things? All of their funding comes from corporations, comes from large shareholders, comes from political lobbies and lobbying groups connected to giant corporations. And they're able to greatly influence the public discourse. And they're able to create these giant media figures like Maddow, who, based on their own merit, is not a journalist at all, just a propagandist and a liar. But capitalist imperialism creates this topsy-turvy world, as Carlos says in his new book, where the worst journalists, the biggest liars in journalism, are able to rise to the top, and they get paid millions of dollars to do these speaking engagements. Whereas real journalists like Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal, yes, they have their followers, they have their hardcore followers like us, but they are constantly being attacked by the establishment and smeared by the establishment. Recently, one of their journalists, Kit Clarenberg, was arrested by the British establishment in London.
A critical piece about Maddow in a left publication, and it obviously upset her about how most of her segments were on Russiagate. This was like back in 2017, I think. Yep. But her speech was extremely boring and simultaneously paranoid and insane. I mean, it was really, really boring. It starts in like Lake Geneva, and she's talking about the austere furniture of people who live in Lake Geneva. Then, the founders of Time magazine moved there because there's too many Jews. There are too many Jews in New York. and they're America firsters, and they begin receiving anonymous bags of cash from Germans in order to oppose the Allied war effort. And meanwhile, anti-war elements in the U.S. warn of a possible civil war if the U.S. goes into the war.
I just want to say this is true. The speaking engagement is nothing more than a kickback for the services rendered. Yeah, like George Bush does all these speaking tours, and Hillary Clinton does too. It's a thing politicians do as well, and oil oligarchs and whatever finance capitalists connected to these NGOs and think tanks can pay the politicians back, pay George Bush and Hillary Clinton back for doing their bidding when they were in office through basically a direct donation.
You know, then the parallels start to become clear when Truman covers for one of the senators who was getting paid off by isolationist and German Nazi elements, and the investigation into Truman is squashed by a politicized DOJ because the U.S. needs to get along with West Germany after the war, on and on. I'm like, when are you going to just say Putin is Hitler and that Trump has been infiltrated by the Nazis? Like, when are you going to say that? And it took forever, and then she finally was building up to it. She went way over her time. The whole crowd was just, I mean, you have these high.
So that's her speech. And remember the video we just watched. Like, even CNN is admitting now that Russiagate was bullcrap, and there needs to be some kind of reckoning where a lot of journalists who push this bullcrap admit that they pushed bullcrap. And Rachel Maddow is giving a speech for the Truman Institute or whatever about how Trump is a Manchurian candidate and Russia's trying to infiltrate the United States. So she's still pushing this dumbass talking point and getting paid really well to do it instead of apologizing for pushing lies for the past 8 years. It was like every night on her show. I knew a few people who watched Maddow, and they were just like, they're finally going to get Trump. They're finally going to get him. They're finally going to prove he's connected to Russia. And as a communist, it's like, why do you have to implicate Trump or make this stuff up about Trump? Why can't you just criticize him for, you know, all the stuff he's done, like sanctioning Cuba, putting the embargo back on Cuba, launching missiles at Syria, doing a tax bill that was basically just a giveaway to the rich. But the Democrats do all that stuff too. The Democrats are imperialists and neoliberals who serve Wall Street as well. So they can't criticize Trump on any of that. So what do? They just make up a fucking conspiracy theory that he is controlled by the Kremlin, and they push it and push it and push it. And when it's proven wrong, when it's proven to be a hoax, they push it some more. And the people doing it are still well paid, getting cushy speaking engagements while Julian Assange sits in a prison for sharing the truth about U.S. war crimes. And that is the truth of our authoritarian, capitalist, imperialist society.
Highly educated people who know nothing, have no political education, certainly no critical faculties, no way of looking at the U.S. war state in a critical way. And they're just bobbleheads. So I got up and tried to question her.
Well, let's go to the tape.
All right.
I got it.
Here it is.
And members of Congress who were sympathetic.
Rachel, this speech is boring and paranoid. Can you explain why you promoted the Steele? Why did you promote the Steele dossier, which has been proven to be a lie? Why did you promote the lie of Russian bounties? Can you ever be held accountable for the lies you told Americans for years and years and years? You lied to Americans for years.
Just go.
Silence is violence, Rachel.
You're out. You're out.
There you go. You want my badge? There you go.
No response. No response. She looked right to security. She can't even think of like a fake answer to give.
Which one? Rachel Maddow refusing to answer questions about lying about the Steele dossier, lying about Russian bounties, and doing a paranoid speech claiming Nazism is afoot in America. And I'm being thrown out by security now. There was no Q&A. If there was Q&A, I would have politely asked a question. So there you have it. And we can watch Maddow's response. I think it's kind of revealing. Typically smug. I didn't see it, obviously, because they bundled me. They pounced on me. They were trying to lift me in the air at one point. And then they realized like I was cooperating. So whatever. And you could hear the crowd just excited and excitedly cheering me being thrown out and her refusing to answer questions. They seem to enjoy her speech, but I just thought it was so boring and insane.
That it's like, who's paying for these speaking engagements? Who would actually pay to watch George Bush or Hillary Clinton or Rachel Maddow speak? And that was one of the funny things that Trump did in the 2016 Republican primaries, was like Jeb Bush would say something in favor of the Iraq War or whatever, and people would cheer in the audience, and Trump would point him out and be like, that's all of Jeb's donors. That's all of his corporate donors and lobbyists. Like, those are the people, or those are the reason our government's corrupt. And that's why they're not cheering for me, but people at home, they're cheering for me. And it was like the most populist, good thing that Trump did in the debates, that just showed the corporate and corrupt nature of the other Republican candidates who he was going against. So I'm sure it's the same type of people at these speaking engagements. But yeah, I wish Bernie would have learned from that. Because I was working for the Bernie campaign. I wish he would have done the same thing. Because he was confronted by Elizabeth Warren and called out by Pete Buttigieg and all these corporate propagandists on stage. It's like, oh, well, I'm very, very sorry. I just want health care, please. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm a sexist. I'm very bad. And he should have just been like, no, you're calling out Medicare for all because you're taking money from the insurance lobby, right? Who's here today at this debate booing me because they know that I'm not going to do their bidding in Washington. Should have called them out like that. This picture is hilarious, by the way.
Maddow's response as she waits.
Coming to a Substack newsletter near you.
That was her response, dude. That's more telling than anything else in this whole video. Right? That her response is coming to a Substack newsletter near you. These people don't even have a job with CNN. They don't even have a job with MSNBC. They're not even doing a speaking engagement for the Truman Institute. Like, that means you suck, Rachel. That means you sold out as a journalist. If you're the darling of the corporate media establishment and you're calling out people and calling them losers for not being accepted by the corporate media establishment, that's a bad thing. The people who aren't accepted by the corporate media establishment are the ones telling the truth. In the 1990s, early 90s, MSNBC, the network that you work for, fired someone for wanting to release footage of the Gulf War, of American troops killing civilians. I can't think of the dude's name now. Hold on. But the point is that dissent and real journalism is systematically excluded from the corporate media system. Peter Arnett, I don't know if that's the guy that I was thinking of, but here's one that happened in, looks like this one was published in 2003. So that might be the one that I was thinking of. But we all know that dissenting voices are systematically removed and excluded from the corporate media establishment. This is what Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent is about. How in the hiring process, they're not going to hire people who don't repeat their narratives and say what they want. And Parenti's Inventing Reality is an even better analysis of the corporate media monster. But for her to make fun of them for writing for Substack instead of having a job for MSNBC just reveals everything. It reveals the elitist attitude of these people. They think that their position and that their wealth represents their merit and their skill as a journalist, which, I don't know. I feel like when Rachel Maddow said that, she looked at the ground, like she didn't look very confident when she said it. She probably knows that the Steele dossier was bullshit. She probably knows that Russiagate had no evidence and she pushed it anyways. and she knows that she's being confronted by somebody telling the truth. So what does she have to fall back on then, other than, well, I work for MSNBC. Well, I have a lot of money. Okay, Rachel, that's fantastic. Good for you, Rachel. Good for you. Seems like the Substack line was shot at Taibbi too. Definitely. These people do the same thing with Taibbi, and it's like, this is what I think Aaron Mate or someone told this to Jimmy Dore when he was talking about running for president. They're like, what the establishment and the corporate media would do is just try and turn you into a joke. They're like, this guy thinks he's running for president. Ha 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 ha. He's an idiot. He's a joke. His opinions are a joke. That's what they did to the guy who read the Pentagon Papers, Mike Gravel. He got on the debate stage one year and called out Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Biden to their faces for promoting war and imperialism, and they laughed at him. Oh, you're crazy. As he's just saying things that are factually true for like 20 minutes. They try and turn you into a joke, which is what they try and do with Taibbi. Oh, you're writing for Substack? Like, yeah, so is Seymour Hersh. Because none of the mainstream media outlets will publish his truthful piece about the Nord Stream sabotage, because they won't go against what the political establishment wants and what Wall Street wants. The Guardian also pushed that BS about Russiagate. Almost all of them did. And like I said, Julian Assange is sitting in a jail cell now, while these people who pushed Russiagate still have jobs, still they're doing these cushy speaking engagements, and they never apologized. You know, when there have been times where Midwestern Marxists put out something that, you know, we learned was wrong or that we later came to disagree with. And if confronted on it, we'll admit it, of course. And we'll even apologize if we got people to believe something that we now don't believe in. But that's because we're actually interested in the truth. Because reality is Marxist. We don't need to distort the truth to push our ideology. Liberals do. Imperialists do. Imperialists need to flip the truth on their head and distort the truth, or distort the facts and tell half-truths. The man follows the smell of money and nothing else. Oh, Taibbi? I like Taibbi as a journalist, though. He's definitely not like a Marxist, but... Oh, yeah. No, you didn't miss anything, Jacob. What's up? Welcome to the stream. Yeah, we were watching Max Blumenthal confront Rachel Maddow on lying about the Steele dossier. The democratic process is there to protect the ruling class. I agree. That's something I feel like I learned from my experience working with the Sanders campaign. Because, like, yeah, I've gone into it in so many videos. I don't want to maybe go into it again, but there was just so much riggery. The primaries, the Democratic primaries were the worst, the election night. Because the big deal about Iowa is Iowa's the first state in the Democratic primary. So if you win Iowa, you get this big media boost. And there had never been a president who had, or had never been a nominee or a candidate who won the 3 out of the first 4 states and then went on to lose, right? If you win those first 3 out of the 4, you have so much momentum, you usually go on to win. It looked like Bernie was going to win maybe at least 3 out of the 4, maybe 4 out of the 4. So then in Iowa, we put in all this work on the ground, knocking on doors, campaigning, talking to people about Medicare for all and healthcare and stuff. And then on election night, there are undemocratic things like there were 17 more Bernie supporters in the gym where I went to vote than there were Elizabeth Warren supporters. Or Pete supporters maybe, but they got the same amount of delegates, right? They got the same amount of votes overall. just because of the way that the votes are counted. So they don't count each individual vote, they count delegates. And you need to have like 25 more voters than the second place person to get an extra delegate. And we only had like 17 extra Bernie people. So even though there were overwhelmingly more Bernie people than anyone else in the gym, we tied with Pete. So there was stuff like that. But then also the app that was used to count the votes shut down in the middle of the voting process, right? It turns out that this app was funded by a company, or produced by a company called Shadow, who were donors to the Pete Buttigieg campaign. Huge donors to the Pete Buttigieg campaign, and they were the ones making the voting app for the primary that shut down. Once the voting app shuts down, the Buttigieg campaign declares themselves the winner of Iowa. And the media goes, they did it. So Pete gets this media boost from Iowa, even though we later come to find out that Bernie had more votes and more delegates. The only thing that he lost, the only metric that he lost was state delegates, which is it doesn't mean anything. It's made up. It has no relevance or meaning. So it was the most blatant manipulation of democracy that I've ever seen. And it happened right after me and all my friends had busted our ass for a full year trying to get this dude Bernie Sanders to win so we would have health care. And so that our friends who joined the military for free college, we hope that they wouldn't get deployed to some ridiculous wars for oil that the Biden administration and the Democrats who we were running against are pushing for right now. Right, with Pete Buttigieg right alongside in his administration. So, and Bernie sold out to the imperialists too, ultimately. So, but that showed me how corrupted the democratic processes in this country are, like unbelievably, to the point of saying like the elections are rigged, right? So then, like when the mainstream media establishment, when MSNBC and CNN freak out about, like on January 6th, when they're like, our democracy was threatened. Oh, it's like, what democracy? You guys collaborated to smear Bernie Sanders. And as we just learned with the Steele dossier, they've also been collaborating to smear Trump and undermine democracy and push what a small number of oligarchs want. And they justify it all with Republicans bad, Republicans backed by Russia. So therefore, everything that we do is justified and is in favor of democracy or in support of democracy. Shit's insane. That power move from Obama getting every candidate to drop out and endorse Biden was historic. Yeah, I didn't even talk about that. So then after it looks like Bernie's going to win, there's like 11 candidates in the race. And Obama gives them all a phone call and gets them to drop out the day before Super Tuesday, before most of the big states vote. There's like 22 states who vote on that day. And apparently he really, really had to convince a couple of them. Elizabeth Warren took some convincing, and Pete Buttigieg, despite the fact that he had no chance at that point, which shows how arrogant that guy is. He did not want to drop out, right? But he said, we need party unity, and we got to stop this radical communist Bernie Sanders who wants people to have health care from getting in the office. So I'm going to do what's best for the country and drop out and help rig the election for Joe Biden, so we can do a proxy war in Ukraine. Thank you, Pete Buttigieg. But yeah, that was Obama who orchestrated that behind the scenes, just so you can't have health care. That guy went so far to stop you from having health care. He implemented this corporate half measure invented by Mitt Romney called Obamacare when there was a Democratic supermajority, and then he helped rig the Democratic primary so we couldn't have somebody who pushes for Medicare for all. These people really don't want you to have health care because they're really getting a lot of money from the healthcare industry and the insurance industry. Hope I didn't miss it, but did you ever discuss and debunk the article I sent a while back? Just finished No Great Walls, recommended, by the way, 10 out of 10. Oh, nice. I'm glad you like that. Carlos Martinez is awesome. Great author. A lot of knowledge about China. Yeah, recommend everybody check that out on MidwesternMarks.com. But I don't know if I discussed and debunked the article you sent. Remind me of what article it was. I'll check it out. Thank you so much for the super chat, though. I just joined as Eddie was going, ooh, what happened? I don't know. I don't remember. Did you know that Rachel Maddow used to be a progressive on Air America Radio before she worked for MSNBC? I'm not surprised, man. A lot of people are opportunists and a lot of people are careerists. A lot of people aren't in this for revolution. Like people who throw themselves into politics and into the media sphere. It's just so easy to sell out because then your income is attached to that versus like a working class person who's got another job and then is involved in, cares about revolution because they want their life to be better and to get more pay, more benefits from their job and more time off and more time with their family. Like those people can't sell out. They don't have a choice. They're just working every day and they want revolution so that their lives can improve. They need revolution so their lives can improve. Versus someone who's like trying to be a commentator or a pundit. When I say this as someone who's coming to you on Twitch right now, people who are trying to be educators or academics even, it's just so damn easy to sell out. But that's why Midwestern Marx is here, to give the proletariat an educational arm, an educational organ, a propaganda organ that doesn't sell out and doesn't go all MSNBC liberal on you. Because we have the power of theory and the working class on our side. And the pull-ups I did this morning. Thank you so much, Sam. $10 super chat, big time. And Sam is a YouTube member. Really appreciate that. We would not be able to do what we do without you guys, so thank you. Segment idea. Obama's post-presidency has remained active, and I think an in-depth analysis of his post-presidency activities would be fruitful for how the ruling class continues to operate. That's such a good idea, Sam, because we were talking earlier about how George Bush and I'm going to write that down actually, how George Bush and Hillary Clinton are still doing these speaking campaigns and are still active, getting paid a lot of money to push certain ideas. But Obama, even more so than that, like you said, was working behind the scenes to rig the Democratic primary. And I'm sure there's much more. I'm sure he's very involved with the Democratic establishment, the neoliberal establishment, I should say. So it'd be really interesting to do a deep dive into it. I'm writing it down to remember later. In Obama, like, his legacy was recuperated pretty quickly. Like, they recuperated George Bush now, which is crazy, and even Dick Cheney somehow, or Liz Cheney at least. But it took a little bit longer because Iraq was such a disaster and so fresh in everybody's mind for such a long time because it went on for 20-some years. It's still going on today. But Obama, a lot of people, Trump followed him and I go, oh, I miss Obama. I miss the good liberal Obama who never had any controversies except for when he wore a tan suit. That was his only controversy, according to CNN and MSNBC. We miss the days of Obama. It's like this man brought slavery back to Libya. He destroyed that country, which was overseen by Hillary Clinton, by the way, who then ran in 2016 and was surprised that she was unpopular. Destroyed Libya and then had no exit plan. Just left the country with no central government. Whoops. Good luck, guys. Hopefully a bunch of militias and warlords don't start fighting each other in the power vacuum we've created. Oh, what? That's exactly what happened? Oh, well, sorry. NATO's out. We were there to take out the dictator. We didn't have an exit strategy. By the way, we're going to mine all your resources now. And you can no longer use your resources for Libyan development like you were before, which is why Libya before was one of the most prosperous countries in all of Africa. So the idea that Obama's only scandal was when he wore a tan suit is just an American-centric idea that you could only believe if you're deep, deep, deep within the Democratic establishment. Eddie, do you have a Buy Me a Coffee account? No, what is that? I've seen that lately. I have a Patreon. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. Oh no, you're already a Patreon, Albert. I have a PayPal. My PayPal is at the bottom of Midwestern Marks. If you go, it's like support us financially. But it's like the PayPal is like technically mine. It says if you'd like to make a one-time donation to our PayPal, please click here. And it's like towards the bottom by the big red star. What's the buy me a coffee? Can you actually like buy me a coffee, or do you like send them money? To make a payment and leave a message. Oh, it looks like it's just a payment. If people could actually buy me coffee or like energy drinks, that would be sick. Actually, I'm trying to lay off on the energy drinks because I love them so much, but they make you go bald and they give you cancer. So Americans are getting reproletarianized in a hurry, if that's any consolation. I agree. I can't wait till Noah's article on reproletarianization comes out. I need to ask you guys too. I guess, should I get a Buy Me a Coffee account now? Is that a thing? All the libertarians are using Buy Me a Coffee. I'm paranoid of that trend. Yeah, they're all using Rumble too, and we're on Rumble. What else was I going to ask? Oh, should we get a Twitter premium account so we can post our longer form content, our YouTube content on Twitter? I feel like that's a good idea for outreach, and I just don't know how much it would cost. But there's a Skittles energy drink called C4. Yeah, I've seen that. It's based on a pre-workout, or it's the same company. I've had C4 pre-workout, and it was actually banned in the WIA, Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association, or whatever the hell it stands for. They banned C4. So I was always really, really careful not to drink C4, so I didn't somehow fail a drug test in high school and get banned from wrestling, even though they never drug tested us because we were high schoolers. Please get a Buy Me a Coffee account, quick and easy. Okay. I shall look into it. The Lockheed Martin clip from Max from the same event is also pretty good. Let's see that. That actually sounds like something we should watch. While we're on the gray zone stuff. That Rachel Maddow image of her like leaning down into the camera is so funny and weird. Look at that. So this is from the same event. Is it a different video or is it the same video? Is it this? I don't even see. Oh, here's their live stream. I did that in their live stream. Oh, thank you, Sebastian. C4 trend flavored. Yes. How can we trust Trump to stay consistent on being broadly against the Ukrainian proxy war if he seems generally erratic and self-interested? I mean, I don't think we can, right? That's been my analysis from the beginning, is Trump is a fake anti-imperialist, and he just uses populist and imperialist rhetoric. Now, that rhetoric can be helpful, right? It can be helpful because he's convincing a lot of working class people that the war in Ukraine is stupid. So in that sense, it's good, and I like his rhetoric compared to the Republican establishment. But I don't think anybody should put their hope in Trump or like spend their energy organizing for Trump. I think he's better than DeSantis in the Republican primary, and those are our options. And just like I think RFK is better than Biden in the Democratic primary. But I wouldn't trust either of them. And, really, there's only so much you can do with the executive office to limit imperialism. Like, towards the end of Trump's tenure, he tried to, like, withdraw all the troops at once, basically, like, through an executive order. And the Pentagon was just like, no. So, the State Department and the Pentagon and the political establishment in general and the military-industrial complex and the lobbies like AIPAC and all the other pro-war lobbies are a tough opponent to overcome and outmaneuver, even if you're the president of the United States. So, our answer to imperialism and capitalism is still social revolution. It's organizing and educating the masses so we can form a mass movement and overthrow our political establishment completely and build a new one that represents the workers and the interests of the workers. But if you look at our bourgeois political system right now, which is in crisis, right, Trump is kind of a symptom of that crisis. The fact that there's just this guy calling out a lot of imperialism and, gaining a lot of popularity with populist rhetoric as an anti-establishment figure. And you have something similar on the Democratic side with RFK talking about, criticizing big pharma and some of the craziness with COVID and the COVID response and the capture of WHO and these other public health institutions by private healthcare companies and shareholders. So it's interesting and very valuable to analyze, but I'm not going to be telling anybody to go door knocking for Trump. I'm not even going to tell anybody to vote for Trump. I mean, if you're a registered Republican, which I imagine 0.000% 0.1% of my audience is, sure, you can go vote for Trump over DeSantis. But yeah, sent an article in chat, by the way. J11 return. Oh, I will check it out. Thank you so much for the repeated super chat, Sebastian. Try to find that. Are you a part of the Discord? If not, I will message you the Discord after this stream, so you can share stuff in there. Because I don't see the article now. After your talk with Ruzarin, did he put you in contact with the Spaniards? I'm curious because I'm Spanish and I follow Ruzarin's work. Santiago Armesia would be interesting, but I'm not sure he speaks any English. Yes. I actually need to check my Instagram DMs. I've been meaning to do that. I'm going to do that after this stream. I'm going to add that to my list of things to do because Diego put me in contact with a handful of other accounts around the world that are fairly big and wanted to talk with us about America and some of the same topics that we hit on with Diego. And I haven't checked. He sent me like 4 messages with people's contact after I asked him, and then I haven't opened it yet. You have to be a patron to join the Discord. For now, yeah. I need to make it so YouTube members can join as well, though, too. And Twitch subscribers. That's supposed to be the case also. It's supposed to be available for everyone. I'll figure that out later. I'll also write that down on my list of things to do. Because I want to build the Discord. The Discord is so valuable. The Patreon link, it's just patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. There's a link in the description of the stream, actually. Yeah, so it is. I'm trying to see, is this part where Blumenthal confronts Lockheed Martin in this video? Looks like it.
What went down? National security and war state.
TrueCon.
And I just had to call out the hypocrisy. It was just infuriating. Tried to do so in a kind of humorous way, just to highlight the absurdity of the whole thing. And here's what went down.
Hello.
Max Blumenthal, the Gray Zone. My pronouns are Trump Russia. Lockheed Martin has been identified as one of the most diverse employers in the country. And I was wondering if you knew.
Lockheed Martin has people read their pronouns. That's fucking hilarious. Oh, I got nothing against pronouns. I'll respect anybody's pronouns if they tell me. But the fact that these military-industrial complex executives, these people who are pushing for, lobbying for endless wars, endless destruction, the bombing of children in Yemen and Palestine and Ukraine and all over the world, they're concerned about pronouns here at home. They're concerned about people's feelings here at home, but they're okay with bombing children overseas and in Palestine. Jesus Christ.
Knew by any chance how many products or weapons produced by Lockheed Martin, diversity and equity and inclusion bombs have been dropped on the children of Palestine, Yemen, or Syria?
Why do they cut him off? What did he say that was wrong? How many inclusion bombs have been dropped on the children of Palestine? There's something like 60 some Palestinian children killed just in the past few years. Consortium News reported that. And recently, like within the last year, there was a story where like 11 Palestinian children were in their home seeking trauma care because they were traumatized from the last time they got struck by a missile. And another missile came and it struck the home that they were in and killed them all. It was like 9 or 10 or 11 kids. I can't remember how many, but that's the situation in Palestine that Lockheed Martin is making a whole bunch of money off of. And a whole bunch of taxpayer money, too, because the U.S. is giving Israel over $3 billion a year, and then they have all these contracts with Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing and the American military-industrial complex, weapons manufacturers, which they turn around and buy weapons from. So your tax dollars are subsidizing this apartheid. They're paying for the weapons that are being used to enforce this apartheid, and these people are profiting off of it while talking about how intersectional and pronoun inclusive they are.
And also, do you happen to know off the top if any non-binary U.S. Navy divers were used in blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines?
Thank you. If anyone has some information, please just wait so that you can give me the scoops too. Another question.
So you have on stage this guy from the Huffington Post, Akbar Shakir Khan, I think his name is. He's a complete tool who always comes in as the token Muslim to advance the dirty war on Syria. And there he is, kind of shining the shoes of the national security state with a diverse veneer. To his right is a woman, April something. I'm forgetting her name right now. I'll pull it up in a second. She's at the State Department. She said at one point that we can't go to the negotiating table with our adversaries with a team that's pale, male, and stale. And so DEI makes America stronger. In other words, we need the intersectional empire. Then Gil Cisneros, who's in charge of personnel for the Pentagon, I guess he's Latino, or maybe he would even say he's Latinx. And then one of the higher ups at the Elliott School, George Washington University to the right, who is a woman. And I believe all neocon women. They didn't like the question, as you can see. Oh, there you are. They didn't like.
So that's the same convention that Rachel Maddow is speaking at, right? So there's the revolving door, or not even revolving door, just connections between the military-industrial complex and the media. There's this event funded by all these ultra-billionaires, and Lockheed Martin is there giving a speech at the same time that Rachel Maddow is giving a speech, and they're both shutting down criticism and ignoring criticism. If you're a journalist and you're accepted by the same people and the same think tanks and the same speaking engagements that are hosting executives from weapons contractors, from companies who sell weapons and make up the American military industrial complex, you may not be doing your job as a journalist or a reporter. it may be time to consider that you have sold out. I'm sure that thought doesn't even cross Rachel Maddow's mind, though. She's too far gone. She gave up her principles years ago, as have a lot of these people. Thoughts on Ben Norton? I like Ben. I know there's a lot of beef with Ben. I know he left the gray zone because he had disagreements with them. I lean, obviously, more towards the gray zone's positions in those contentious issues. Like, I don't know if it seemed like he had a different position on COVID and the mandates. Obviously, I lean more towards Aaron and Anya and Max. And Anya and Aaron are like two of my heroes with the journalism they've done, and Max too, honestly. So I side with them. But I still think Ben does amazing work. I think he does amazing interviews, geopolitical analysis. I think he's right on the major issues of imperialism. And, you know, he speaks to a lot of people who Midwestern Marx doesn't speak to. So I'm all for that, right? Like the purity fetish that Carlos talked about in his book, or the way we try and apply that, is like we truly care about making alliances and building an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, socialist, communist alliance, right? So if people have minor disagreements with us, or, you know, get into little spats with people who we're friends with, we're not going to write them off for that. And 99% of the work that Ben Norton does is really great. We've republished a lot of his work. I showed his work here on stream, used his work about China to make certain arguments. He's debunked some of the most pernicious anti-China claims in the media, like the idea that China's debt trapping and doing financial imperialism. He's debunked a lot of these claims, and as they've come out, and focused on specific African countries that propaganda has been focused on at various times. So he's done a lot of great work, you know, and I'm not going to like dismiss Ben Norton because we have a different view on like Tucker Carlson. You know, I might voice my opinion, my disagreement with him. He may read it, he may not, he may care, he may not, man, move on. You know, but the vast majority of that work that dude is doing is good. So. He was passive aggressive when he left. Yeah, right. There's some stuff I disagree with, but he still makes content that I think is really good. You know, he doesn't have to be someone who I would probably hang out with in real life for me to think that his content is ultimately a force for good in the world. So, yep, that's my opinion on it. And I don't have anything against you if you don't like Ben Norton, right? If you'd rather watch Midwestern Marx, Aaron Nate, Max Blumenthal, Danny Haifong, whoever else, go for it. You know, as long as you're not watching MSNBC and CNN and Vaush and all this garbage. Personal attacks on Karl Marx. Okay, I can check that out, Jacob. I do like the short videos. I read a biography about Lenin wrote like a little biography of Marx's life that I read on his birthday. We reposted it. But, speaking of reposting, Monthly Review posted our censorship article today. That was pretty cool. So not only has it been reposted on Countercurrents, but now it's been reposted on Monthly Review, if I can find it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. Carlos sent me the link earlier. Why can't I find it now? Maybe we tweeted it. I hope we tweeted it. Ooh, Orinoco Tribune just reposted it as well. So now our article about TikTok censorship and the censorship that Midwestern Marx. Ooh, donate to Orinoco Tribune if you get a chance. I'm going to subscribe to their Patreon later. If we've now had this article about TikTok censorship republished in Latin America, which is, I believe that's where Orinoco Tribune's based. That's where they focus their coverage on anyway. In India, which is where Countercurrents is from, and a monthly review. Is monthly review based in the UK, or are they American? Are they like New York or something? Now I want to look it up. But yeah, this talks about how we were banned. New York, I had it right. Monthly reviews in New York. I don't know how I knew that, but either way, what was I saying? Yes, so we've been banned from TikTok 7 times. One of our accounts had 375,000 followers. Another one of our accounts had over 200,000 followers. Just completely wiped out hours and hours of our work. All the followers that we had built up over that time. Wiped out my mixed martial arts analysis accounts for some reason, which was just like a kick in the nuts, I tell you what. But later it was revealed that TikTok had deleted 300,000 accounts, which they claimed were advancing Russian propaganda. And that included the Vanguard account, this collective account that I was part of with some other socialists that had over 100,000. And it turned out that TikTok, the US government had forced TikTok, ByteDance, this Singapore and China or Beijing-based company, to hand over management of their US servers to a company called Oracle. And Oracle is notoriously tied to the CIA, the US State Department, and the political establishment in general. So Oracle had quickly hired some former NATO operatives, some former intelligence operatives, some former State Department officials to manage all of their content. So when when our video gets mass reported by angry radlibs or people who support the Ukrainian proxy war, the person reviewing our video and deciding if our account gets to stay up or not are literal NATO officials, literal State Department officials, literal intelligence operatives. And, you know, that shows you what all this hysteria about TikTok has been about, right? China's infiltrating us with TikTok. China's manipulating our children with TikTok. No, they were just letting free speech actually be allowed for once, and Marxist ideas were becoming really popular. Because Americans are ready for a revolution. And the government couldn't have that. Oracle couldn't have that. The ruling class couldn't have that. So they freaked out about TikTok, said China's stealing your data, blah, 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 even though U.S. companies are actually stealing all your data and they have a terrible reputation with data theft. And the China's Great Firewall is just designed to keep American companies from stealing Chinese citizens' data. Yet Americans fell for this fear-mongering about China, and a lot of them called for the banning of TikTok. And what they really did was just censor socialists and communists while boosting these neoliberals like Philip DeFranco. Sebastian, thank you so much for yet another super chat. I believe that's Sebastian's fourth super chat of the live. Sebastian, you might be breaking a record here for repeated super chats. Congratulations to you, and congratulations to us all. Sub to Patreon and message you on Discord. Thank you so much for subbing to the Patreon. I will check your Discord message as soon as the stream is over. And because of your support, I will definitely read that article that you sent me. And on the next stream, we'll break it down bit by bit. What's up, David? How's it going? How is it going? Much love, much love. I'm going to make a TikTok in the near future inspired by your little critique of Doug Walker, the nostalgia critic at the end of your District 9 movie review. And it'll just be me dunking on him, citing George Orwell and ripping into Animal Farm. And I'm going to dunk on him himself. So keep an eye out for that in the near future. Absolutely, I will. That sounds awesome, Jacob. I like the nostalgia critic, but he needs to be dunked on. He needs to be criticized. I'm sure you're a Pink Floyd fan, Jacob. He made a terrible movie review of The Wall, saying that The Wall is a terrible movie and blah, 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 even though it's beloved and a lot of, lot of people enjoy that movie and felt like his critiques fell completely flat and like he just didn't understand it, similar to District 9. So, yeah. Sounds good. I'm looking forward to that. All right, before we get into this real garbage propaganda video, Russia, China, Iran, let's watch this video Jacob sent us.
Marx had 6 children, never worked a day in his life. 3 of his kids died of starvation in infancy. 2 others committed suicide. Not a successful model father. When he died, 6 people attended his funeral. Karl Marx developed, though, in 1848, the Communist Manifesto, how to destroy a country.
He spent his whole life working. The dude worked himself to death. Instead of taking care of his own health, he just like locked himself in libraries and read. I mean, he was extremely active organizing the workers politically and doing on the ground work when he was young. And then when he was old, he just like locked himself in the library and read every book in existence so he could write Capital.
How to have it be taken over by communism. First thing, you abolish private property. Now, everything Marx did
heavy progressive income tax. The Chinese have lower taxes than Americans, which some people might find surprising. But I don't know if there's anything in Marx's work about higher taxes, especially not income taxes, right? The idea is that you change how property works and how ownership works, not you just tax the owning class a little bit more. Abolish rights of inheritance, confiscation of property rights, not personal property rights. So this abolish private property and confiscation. How do you confiscate property rights? It doesn't make sense. You can't capture a right, but these should be the same thing. There's no abolition of personal property. Nobody's coming for your toothbrush. But we do want to ultimately abolish private property in favor of public property, but that's something that happens over a long transition. But central bank. What? It just says central bank. What? There's no explanation. Central bank is communism. Communism is when bank. Is someone going to tell these guys that every capitalist country nowadays has a central bank? I don't even know what to do with that one. Government ownership of communication and transportation. Yes, and I wish this was a thing. Think about how nice it would be if your Wi-Fi company was nationalized. Nobody likes Mediacom in the whole world. Nobody likes it. The means of communication need to be nationalized so they can be made much cheaper and so they can be made much more efficient. The profit-based Wi-Fi companies and telephone companies are garbage. And we need huge investments in public transportation. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want more trains and even more buses? Government ownership of factories and agriculture. Collective ownership of factories and agriculture. Worker ownership of factories and agriculture. Government control of labor, workers' control over the value that their labor produces. There does need to be some kind of a central plan created by the society, but it's not just a top-down plan enforced by the government. Corporate farms, regional planning, what the hell? No, collective farms, not corporate farms. Someone definitely just did a typo here. They meant to say collective farms and they wrote corporate farms. That's capitalism. Free education. Yeah, what a terrible thing that would be.
Intentionally was anti-Christian. If the Bible's for it, he's against it.
Oh, that's interesting. Combination of education with industrial production. He did want labor and different kinds of labor to be incorporated into education so that kids could learn how to work, learn how to contribute to the society, and then decide what they like to do and decide what they're good at. So it's not like child labor. It's like letting kids experiment with different kinds of labor so that labor can be seen as a more fulfilling thing and something that you do for the benefit of the community, not that you're forced to do a few hours a day or 8 hours a day so that you can survive for the enrichment of your boss.
See, the Bible makes private property a real serious issue. Ownership of private property is critical. You can't have freedom without property rights. What good's it do to say you got all kinds of freedom if there's no place to exercise your freedom? Leviticus 25 says the 50th year was hallowed, and it's the year of Jubilee. You could not possibly lose your property permanently in the biblical system. It says every man has.
So they're conflating personal property with private property. The government's coming for your toothbrush. The Bible wasn't even written when they had capitalist property relations. They had feudal relations or slave relations. So you could make this same argument to defend slavery. The Bible says your property is your property, and whatever the government says is your property is your property. You know, under capitalism, the government says that it protects the private property of capitalists, which equals the factories and the farms and the means of productive power, the things that produce the means of subsistence. And because that's hoarded by this small class at the top, whose hoard is protected by the state, the government, and the armed bodies of the state, the mass of society has to sell their labor to this small group of people in order to survive, in order to make it. So it's a totally different system of property and relations of production than what existed during the Bible. So the relations of property have changed over time since then, but still, they're just conflating personal and private property.
His own vine and his own fig tree. Drink waters out of your own cistern, waters out of your own well. Private property is essential.
Private property is not essential. There have been societies who lived with a communist system of property and a collective system of property before wealth and greed and all these terrible things developed that Jesus, in fact, detested. Jesus was a revolutionary. I agree. I'm pretty sure they meant corporate farms to villainize Marx and communism. Maybe the people support small farms. Maybe the people in the church. So they're trying to say Marx supported corporate farms, but I think everybody knows that Marxism is not in favor of corporations, especially not the corporate capture of agriculture. All right, this next video, I don't know if we'll get through the whole one. Someone requested this, in the Discord, in the stream reaction channel, where you can post articles and YouTube videos. I check it every day and oftentimes react to them in the stream. That's actually where most of our reaction content comes from, is the Discord. So you can join the Patreon. If you join the Patreon for even $1 a month, you get to be in the Discord for life. We'll never kick you out unless we get sabotaged again. And the entire Discord gets permabanned again. That happened once. But unless that happens, you get in for life. So someone sent this, Kings and Generals. It said, new State Department account just dropped. So we often cover and talk about and follow these history accounts or these geopolitics accounts on YouTube, like infographics, who do these really, really slick, really, really well-produced and well-edited videos about geopolitics and history. And they're presented as objective and fact-based. And in a lot of ways they are. They include a lot of facts and a lot of good history. But then they just smudge the truth a little bit, or they leave out certain facts, or they leave out really important details to ultimately push the U.S. State Department line, the NATO line, the anti-Russia, anti-China line. So I have no idea what this Kings and Generals account is, where it came from, if they have some kind of funding or whatever, if they are actually the new State Department account. But either way, this is their little animated video, long animated video about Russia, China, and Iran.
The end of the Cold War was a watershed moment for the geopolitical balance of power. For the first time in centuries, a single state, the United States of America, was powerful enough to exert its influence everywhere in the world. Following the demise of the Soviet Union, there was no other country capable of rivaling American power. Despite this, states like Russia, China, and Iran have always opposed America's growing influence in their respective regions. And as the United States committed several strategic blunders in Iraq and Afghanistan, and failed to exercise a stabilizing influence in war-torn countries like Syria and Libya, it suffered a significant reputational blow.
Sorry, I was responding to something in the chat quick.
Strategic blunders in Iraq and Afghanistan, and failed to exercise a stabilizing influence in war-torn countries like Syria and Libya.
Okay, I thought it said exerted a stabilizing influence in Syria and Libya. I'm like, what? And threw those countries into a disaster. No, this part, everything you said so far is pretty much correct.
It suffered a significant reputational blow. Gradually, countries like Russia, China, and Iran, which opposed America's unipolarity, started becoming more vocal in their criticism of the post-Cold War international order. Today, we will examine if Russia, China, and Iran can deepen their relations and become a fully fledged alliance akin to NATO, or if their cooperation is situational.
They don't want to be an alliance akin to NATO. They want a trade alliance. They want an alliance based on mutual development. Right? How many wars around the world, how many destabilizing wars have these countries been in? I mean, Russia more than the other ones, but they just said, you know, the U.S. failed to play a stabilizing role in Syria. They destabilized Syria. Russia did the opposite. They helped stabilize things. And I mean, China did with their trade, but Russia actually sent troops to help Assad fight the extremist terrorist groups that the U.S. was dumping money and weapons and legitimacy into, groups like Jaish al-Islam and other just extremist groups who the U.S. basically welded together into a coalition of extremists that they called the Rebel Coalition. But that's what the U.S. has been doing all around the world. And as he just mentioned, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, these countries have been trading with each other, right? Iran is engaged in some conflicts regionally, especially with Israel, that, again, the U.S. is dumping money and arms into so they can attack the U.S.'s enemies in the region, like Iran and Syria. But they're mostly engaged in disputes around their borders. Russia, the same thing. We were talking with Dan Kovalik, the interventions or the wars that Russia's been involved with have been in Georgia or Chechnya or Ukraine, all countries surrounding Russia. The U.S. is halfway around the world destabilizing Afghanistan, right? They're in the Middle East. They're in North Africa. They're in these countries that aren't even close to the U.S. That have a lot of lucrative resources that the U.S. is trying to gain access to. Right, and that the Syrian intervention and it's worth noting the Syrian intervention, the Libyan intervention were led by NATO, right? They were led by this coalition, this alliance of the U.S. and their allies in West Europe. So NATO is the one leading up imperialism and imperialist interventions nowadays. And to say that Russia and China and Iran are the same thing because they're forging stronger trade ties, because they're trading with each other more, is not accurate, I would say.
One such situation where relations can change quickly would be a conflict of nations. And what do you know, this video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations. And no, we're not saying we're sponsored by war itself, but by a free real-time grand strategy game where you compete with other players for global domination over the modern world. You take a real country into slow-paced, weeks-long games with up to 120...
Should I play one of these games on the gaming stream? Should we like start as Cuba and conquer the world and make everything communist? That would be fun. I gotta finish the Final Fantasy X gaming stream though. Eddie, can you talk with Lady Izahar? Oh my god, I would love to. That is such a good idea. I have her on multiple things. We communicate pretty frequently. She's a good friend. So I will definitely invite her on the stream for an interview. I can't believe I haven't thought of that yet.
And nuclear submarines. You'll also handle your economy and population, keep morale high, or use terrifying weapons of mass destruction to cripple your rivals. Since the game is always ongoing, it's great that you can check it on both PC and mobile to stay up to date on any geopolitical developments affecting your plans. Get the game via our link in the description and get an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. But that's only for the next 30 days.
Gosh, so enough of this!
First, let's examine the history of relations between these countries to understand their historical context. The Russian Empire was among the powers exploiting Imperial China's decline in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Soviet Union supported Mao in the Chinese Civil War, and following the communist victory, the countries enjoyed a short period of close friendship. but after Khrushchev's secret speech, the Sino-Soviet relations gradually deteriorated and at one point escalated to an armed conflict on the border. Watch our Cold War video on these topics. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, relations between Russia and China have been—
I don't even like hearing about the Sino-Soviet split. It makes me cry. Why do they have to fight? Why couldn't they create a united communist force against the imperialist West? But we learned from their mistakes, and now China's foreign policy is uniting everyone against imperialism because the Marxists in China learned from the mistakes of the past.
Steadily improving, as their interests have aligned in many spheres. Russia and Iran have historically been rivals in the South Caucasus and the Caspian Sea region. But as Iran suffered from internal instability and turmoil, it could not contest the Russian and then Soviet dominance in the region. In the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini had no intention of being involved in the Cold War. Despite open animosity towards the United States, he saw the Soviet Union as the lesser Satan. But the collapse of the Soviet Union and the gradual anti-Western turn of Russia brought these two countries—
The Iranian Revolution's important. I know it wasn't a Marxist revolution, right, or a working class revolution. It was led largely by students and by the religious clergy. But it is still important because people were arguing already that, like, Fukuyama thesis, that we were at the end of history and, you know, neoliberalism was going to win. And there was China had just moved, I think it was 1979 when the revolution happened. China had moved towards reform and opening up. So they're like, everything's neoliberalizing and nothing's ever going to change politically. Neoliberalism's the best political system. And then boom, there's this Iranian revolution that overthrows the U.S.-backed Shah and puts in power this Islamic-based revolutionary government that has a very similar economic system to socialism, right? Like 70% of the Iranian industry and all of their banks are owned by the state. So it's not this finance capitalist dominated country, even though obviously there are things the Iranian government does that we disagree with and would rather have them be a communist government. It's still really important geopolitically to understand what the Iranian Revolution was and how that deposed a U.S.-backed leader. And they didn't jump right, like Iran didn't want to get involved in the Cold War. They didn't just jump in and start siding with Russia or the Soviets and China. But it did, like I said, depose a U.S.-backed leader and take away from the control that the U.S. had in that region in West Asia and their control over Iran.
Closer. Due to geographical distance, Iran and China did not have particularly notable ties throughout history. And similar to the Sino-Russian and Russo-Iranian relations, bilateral relations between Iran and China strengthened in the 21st century after China started positioning itself as a global player. This is when the bilateral relations between these countries became close and transformed into multilateral cooperation in some areas. In 1997, at the time when Russia was gradually abandoning its nascent pro-Western course and was growing unhappy with NATO expansion into its former...
So this is good. Everything he's saying here is good. He mentions NATO expansion towards Russia, and he mentions that Russia was bending over backwards to serve the West. And the West continued to expand NATO. The West continued to be hostile and just try and treat them like a third world country to be exploited. And Russia eventually got sick of it. And that's how you get Putin. That's how Putin comes about as a political phenomenon. He says, you know, I'm going to make the Russian oligarchs invest in Russia. We're not going to be socialists. We're not going to be the Soviet Union. Marx and Engels were still wrong, blah, blah, blah. Lenin was bad. This is where we, of course, disagree with Putin and where the communists in Russia disagree with Putin. But, you know, we need some economic nationalism. We need to, you know, control our own oil and gas, our own energy supplies, and industrialize Russia and rebuild a little bit after their economy was plundered by Western multinationals with the dissolution of the USSR, which created a human rights disaster for their people, by the way. People who had state-sponsored jobs and daycare programs and education and all these things that the socialist government provided for years that just went away overnight. And they were thrown into the realities of neoliberal capitalism, where you either sell your labor or starve and die, unless you can get some minor welfare programs enacted. But either way, this history right now that he's giving is pretty good.
Eastern European satellites. And at the time, China was starting to contemplate transforming itself from an economic powerhouse into a geopolitical force. The nations signed a joint declaration on a multipolar world and the establishment of a new international order. There, Russia and China proclaimed their support for a new multipolar global order based on respect for sovereignty, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, and the right of each country to choose its path of development in the light of its specific conditions and without interference from other states.
Doesn't that just sound incredible? Everything that they just laid out sounds like a good thing, right? I don't get how anyone can hear that. China and Russia want a multipolar world based on trade policies of mutual development. You scratch my bag, I scratch yours. We only trade if it helps us both out and helps our economies grow, and will not interfere with your political system, right? Will allow your country to undergo its own path of development. So we're not going to be like the Soviet Union, where we dump money into revolutionary groups and socialist political parties and try and influence socialism around the world and fund socialism around the world. We're not going to do what the U.S. does and fund fascist groups and anti-communist groups and groups who kill and torture and murder socialists all around the world so that we can get U.S. puppet leaders and kleptocracies. We're just going to trade with countries and allow them to develop whatever political systems that they want. Right? You can critique that from a Marxist perspective. You can say that I prefer the foreign policy of the Soviet Union. And sure, I guess I wish the CPC was giving the Communist Party USA a bunch of money and support and stuff like that to build communism here. But that's not what they do. You know, they have this trade policy of complete non-interventionism. And who can disagree with that? Who can disagree with that framework as a way to go about foreign relations and foreign trade? And this is what I was saying earlier about China moving us into the future when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to foreign relations and trade relations. This framework of complete non-interventionism and mutual development is so amazing, and it's allowed China to forge alliances with countries all around the world, even countries like Saudi Arabia, who had long been allies of the U.S., that nobody expected to move towards China.
With this treaty and their policies, they have implicitly and explicitly opposed the existing global order based on Western-supported notions such as human rights transcending borders, the rule of law, and democracy.
So how are they against democracy and the rule of law by supporting non-interventionism and the right for countries to choose their own political systems? The right to choose their own political systems is anti-democracy? That's what democracy is, when you give the people the right to choose their own system. But human rights and democracy in the Western context, in the neoliberal context, which is very different from the Chinese Marxist context and the Marxist context that the Russians are very familiar with, democracy and human rights are just meaningless abstractions. They're just words. We're democracies, you're authoritarian dictatorships. We support human rights, you abuse human rights. So therefore, U.S. interests are above international law. The U.S. can go in and destroy states like they did in Libya and Iraq, even though it allowed terrorist groups to take over the country. Because, all they got to do is accuse these countries of being undemocratic or abusing human rights. And China and Russia saying, no, the U.S. shouldn't be allowed to just go into Iraq and topple their government, or go into Libya and topple their government and allow Al-Qaeda and ISIS to rise to power and allow slavery to come back and allow these countries to turn into a disaster. These countries have the right to choose their own system. And the U.S. is saying that is against democracy and human rights. Letting people around the world choose their own political system is anti-democracy.
Rule of law and democracy. In 2001, Russia and China signed the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, underscoring a strategic partnership between them on a broad array of topics, such as economic and trade relations.
They have to make all these things sound nefarious. Like China and Russia signed the Happy, Happy Friendship Day love partnership that said they were going to trade Care Bears with each other. And then the U.S. is like, clearly they were attempting to undermine the interests of the United States and create a new authoritarian world order.
Cooperation in the technology sphere and international relations. Most importantly, the treaty implied military cooperation and conduct of discussions in case of a threat against one of the states. Around the same time, Russia and China created the
Sorry, I gotta go back. I spaced out.
The treaty implied military cooperation and conduct of discussions in case of a threat against one of the states.
How dare they? How dare they form a defensive alliance as NATO is creeping closer and closer and closer and closer?
Around the same time, Russia and China created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with Central Asian Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. At its inception, this organization was focused on security-related issues, such as counter-terrorism, fighting separatism, extremism, and drug trafficking. Since then, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has expanded to include major Asian powers like India, Pakistan, and Iran. The SCO has grown in prominence.
So they're showing how China has brought all these countries into the fold. Even, former Soviet countries who may be apprehensive about entering an alliance with communist China or with Russia, they're still willing to do it because they see it's in their own interest. And China has this policy, which they don't break, of complete non-interventionism. We're not going to mess with your political system, right? We're just going to help you develop industrially. And this is why I don't criticize China's foreign policy or their trade policy and say, I wish China would support communist movements all around the world like the U.S. did. I do say that from time to time. I do wish China didn't trade with Israel, if I'm being honest with you, from the bottom of my heart. But I understand what they're doing. By having a trade policy of complete non-interventionism and allowing states to develop however they want, these other countries have no apprehension about trading with communist China or they basically have no choice because China is such a productive and economic powerhouse and they have the ability to outsource or finance equitable industrial development in all these countries. It only makes sense for them to forge stronger ties with China and the growing, powerful Chinese economy. And then when China doesn't try and meddle in their government, it continues to build goodwill. It continues to get these countries to want to form relations with China rather than the United States. So it's just fucking genius, dude. Like, as someone who focuses on geopolitics, who calls themselves a geopolitical analyst, the foreign policy, the mutual development and non-interventionist foreign policy of China is amazing, and it's moving foreign relations and foreign policy and geopolitics into the future. China is the most advanced country in the world on many fronts, including this front. And I recommend everyone read Xi Jinping's book, The Governance of China, where he lays out their principles of trade.
Becoming an important platform for military, economic, and energy cooperation. Since China is a massive manufacturer, it requires enormous energy resources, and Russia has them. Therefore, it was only natural for China and Russia to establish an energy partnership. In 2009, Russia and China signed a deal to build the Eastern Siberia Pacific Ocean oil pipeline, which started transporting oil to China in 2011. Furthermore, in 2014, both sides signed a 30-year gas deal worth $400 billion, which envisaged the construction of the Power of Siberia pipeline. In 2019, it started delivering gas to China. Overall, economic and trade relations between Russia and China have been steadily improving too. The trade turnover between these countries has exceeded $100 billion, as China has become the biggest trade partner of Russia. China's Belt and Road Initiative launch has played a vital role here, as Russia is one of the important transit points connecting China to European markets. Following the imposition of Western sanctions on Russia
And that's why the U.S. is mad. They control their own energy, their own gas and their own oil. And this alliance between Russia and China has allowed them to start trading with traditional U.S. allies in West Europe. And just as that's happening and NATO expansion is continuing, NATO holds a summit in 2017 to launch this new Cold War against Russia and China and say their strategic objectives moving forward are to counter Russian and Chinese influence. It's all about the economics, the oil. These finance capitalists want total control of the globe and the globe's resources. They want Russia to remain an impoverished, deindustrialized, so-called third world country forever so that Western multinationals can continue to plunder it. And Russia's saying, no, we're going to take control of our own oil. We're going to forge stronger relations with China. We're going to sell natural gas and oil to Europe. And the U.S. blew up their pipeline for giving energy to Europe and is waging a terrible proxy war where thousands and thousands of Ukrainians are being used as cannon fodder, being sent to fight and die in this war for NATO and for the Western military industrial complex.
2014, after the unrecognized annexation of Crimea, and in 2022, after the full-fledged and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Russia has tried to avoid using dollars in their trade. Russia's removal from SWIFT in 2022 accelerated the Crimea, and in 2022, after following the imposition of Western sanctions on Russia in 2014, after the unrecognized annexation of Crimea, and in
Unrecognized by who? Again, this is what I mean by there's just small little details that they smudge, right? It was recognized by the people of Crimea. Over 90% of them wanted to join Russia, as we were saying yesterday with Dan Kovalik, who just got back from Crimea and who was talking to the Crimean people. It was recognized by them. It was recognized by Russia when the Crimean people had a referendum to join. It was recognized by other countries. It wasn't recognized by the US and NATO, though. So they just say the unrecognized annexation, not the vote held by the Crimean people, which they had a similar vote in 1991, where they voted after the Soviet Union dissolved. They voted to become an independent republic instead of becoming part of Ukraine, right? And there were many policies attempted to Ukrainize this area to promote Ukrainian patriotism or Ukrainian fascism even, and make Ukraine the only language that you can speak. But they failed, and then the Crimeans voted to become part of Russia. It's not an annexation. It's just simply not. Sorry, Bush.
2022, after the full-fledged and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Russia has tried to avoid using dollars in their trade. Russia's removal from SWIFT in 2022 accelerated the pace of this endeavor, as Russia and China agreed to trade for Russian gas supplies in rubles and yuan. In November 2022, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak stated that the share of currencies from states considered
I spaced out again, sorry. I keep having to rewind.
Pledged and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Russia has tried to avoid using sanctions on Russia in 2014, after the unrecognized annexation of Crimea, and in 2022, after the full-fledged and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Russia.
They just say it as if it's a fact, unprovoked. Unprovoked. And that's why people in the Midwestern March Discord are calling this the new State Department channel. Because they give so many facts, they tell you so much history that's true, so that it seems like this video is just objective. It's just the objective truth. Then they slip in stuff like that. The unprovoked invasion. Nobody in their right mind who's been following this issue can call it unprovoked. Right? Disagree with Putin's decision to launch the invasion if you want. Disagree with the scale of the invasion if you want. You know, I don't know what should have, like, you're basically leaving the people of the Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk to die. But if that's your position, whatever. You know, but understand that it wasn't unprovoked. Understand that there was a U.S. coup in Ukraine in 2014 that ousted the democratically elected leader and put in power a pro-fascist government that started pushing these Ukrainian language laws and these Ukrainization policies and allowed fascist groups to have free reign to fire artillery shells at the Donbass region and blow up people's homes. Right? There were 14,000 people who died. How can you call it unprovoked when there were 14,000 deaths?
Russia has tried to avoid using dollars in their trade. Russia's removal from SWIFT in 2022 accelerated the pace of this endeavor, as Russia and China agreed to trade for Russian gas supplies in rubles in their trade. Russia's removal from SWIFT in 2022 accelerated the pace of this endeavor, as Russia and China agreed to trade for Russian gas supplies in rubles and yuan. In November 2022, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak stated that the share of currencies from states considered friendly by Russia rose to 31% in the Russian foreign exchange market, with the yuan having the highest portion. Economic cooperation. Russia has tried to avoid using dollars.
Need to really pay better attention here.
In their trade. Russia's removal from SWIFT in 2022 accelerated the pace of this endeavor, as Russia and China agreed to trade for Russian gas supplies in rubles and yuan. In November 2022, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak stated that the share of currencies from states considered friendly by Russia rose to 31% in the Russian foreign exchange market, with the yuan having the highest portion. Economic cooperation and membership in the same organization are all well and good, but any strategic alliance arguably cannot be possible without significant military cooperation, and Russia and China have been developing just that in recent years.
So what? So what? The U.S. has military cooperation with every country in West Europe and every NATO country. They have military cooperation with Canada. Except our military cooperation is used to do things like invade Iraq, which there were Canadian troops sent to Iraq. There were freaking Swiss troops sent to Iraq, even though they're supposedly neutral. There were British troops in Iraq, obviously. Tony Blair repeated the lie about weapons of mass destruction. We have military alliances, strategic alliances that are going around the world and toppling foreign governments and leaving them in their countries in a disaster, where terrorist groups are taking over. But then when these two countries that are right next to each other, that are both being openly targeted by NATO, who continually is expanding to their borders and training up and arming fascists on their borders, when they want to form a defensive strategic military alliance, that's a step too far. They're only allowed to trade. Well, and they only have been trading for the last decade. But now that they want to have some military cooperation, of course they want to have military cooperation. Look at the U.S. military bases surrounding China, as I'm typing that into Google. Imagine for a second that the U.S. was doing this, that that Russia or China were surrounding the U.S. with bases like this. Right? Or imagine if Russia or China toppled the same way that the U.S. did in Ukraine. If they toppled the Canadian government or the Mexican government and replaced it with a fascistic anti-U.S. coup government and then started amassing troops right on the U.S. border, you don't think we would act at all? You don't think we would start, forging a defensive military alliance? I mean, if that happened, the U.S. would just invade instantly. Right? They would be far more aggressive than China and Russia have ever been. But the idea that Russia and China have no reason to build a military alliance, or that there's no defensive reason for them to do that, is totally crazy. Just look at the U.S. military bases surrounding them, or look at the events in Ukraine. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for another super chat. It's like Sebastian's 17th super chat he sent us today. Basically holding up Midwestern Marx on its back right now. A true legend of the proletariat. So are you familiar with the SAO documentary, North Korea World Playlist on YouTube? Super fascinating. And a more open look into the DPRK. Episode 4 is super cool. I am not. That sounds really cool. What does SAO stand for? It pops up right away. I've noticed there are a lot of people realizing that there's a lot of people lately seeing through the North Korea propaganda, specifically the propaganda about the DPRK. And it's like, that's strange because they've been so heavily demonized for however long, and Americans have just considered them this crazy, evil comic book villain of a country for so long. And the Kim family the same way. But it's almost like that's backfired now because people realize how absurd the claims of these folks like Yeonmi Park are, right? When people are claiming that the North Korean hospitals just feed their patients dead rats, it's like, well, that doesn't seem like it makes any sense. That just doesn't sound true. And now you have all these cool documentaries like this one that, I just exited out. I meant to full screen it. Sorry, Sebastian, but cool documentaries like this, which I will watch later. You have the video of the two guys going to North Korea to get a haircut. You have Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang. You have My Brothers and Sisters of the North. All great movies debunking North Korea propaganda. And, I did a deep dive into Yeonmi Park. It's like an hour and a half long, and I recommend people check that out, watching her appearance on Jordan Peterson and just showing all these libertarian NGOs and think tanks who fund her and prop her up and pay her to make these ridiculous claims. So, yeah, that's a little bit of a side note, but I do see people seeing through the bullcrap lately.
In 2015, Russia started selling its Su-35 fighters and S-400 air defense systems to China. In September 2018, Russia conducted the Vostok 2018 military exercises, which included the Chinese army. Since then, the two countries have participated in joint military exercises within the framework of their bilateral relations and under the auspices of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In 2022, Russia and China carried out joint naval and ground military exercises
under the framework of their cooperative agreement, right? Which is completely non-interventionist, which is based on the rights of political systems and states to develop on their own. so inherently a non-interventionist military agreement.
On several occasions, both in a group with other countries and just the two of them. Even though there might have been negative moments in military cooperation between the countries, such as the Russian state defense conglomerate Rostec accusing China of theft of Russian military technologies, overall, the military partnership between these two states has been on a steady course of development. In early 2021, a senior Chinese official claimed there was no limit to Sino-Russian military cooperation. While Russia and Iran have historically had problematic relations and competed for influence in the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Caspian Sea, sanctions imposed on Russia in 2014 and the war in Syria brought them together. In 2014, the two nations signed an oil for goods deal, reportedly worth.
The war in Syria brought them together, huh? So the U.S. intervention against Assad in Syria and the funneling of money and arms into a bunch of extremist terrorist groups turned countries in that region against the U.S. Go figure. I mean, that's a huge part of this shift towards multipolarity, right? That kind of reveals, these countries are being pushed to form these alliances, and even countries who traditionally haven't been friends with Russia or China are now forming these alliances because they see the belligerence of the U.S. and the U.S. policy, and they see all these horrible, disastrous interventions the U.S. has done around the world, like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. They're like, we do not want to go that direction, right? We want stability. We want right to self-determination. We want to be able to develop our own state, our own government, our own political system, our own economy, without getting invaded and bombed to the Stone Age and sanctioned to death by the West and the Western financial system. Because what this doesn't bring up either, and what Vijay Prasad's Washington Bullets does such a great job of laying out, is that since World War II, you had the formation of the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, and this whole system of international law, which is bourgeois international law, and this whole global financial system, this whole global banking system, completely dominated by the West and Western finance capital and the US, NATO, and their allies. So that allows them to enforce sanctions on other countries and pretty much act with impunity around the world, because international law is not enforced against Western countries often, and it's been crafted by Western finance capitalists to let the West do whatever they want. And John Bolton argued in the early 2000s that U.S. Interests are more important than international law and should be considered a priority over international law, which is the neocon ideology that's captured the U.S. But all these countries are now going against that global financial system. They've seen what the IMF and the World Bank have done. They've seen what U.S. intelligence agencies have done. They've seen what this U.S.-dominated unipolar world has done and how it disrupts countries and doesn't let them develop and doesn't let them do what they want and live freely and independently. Whereas China and Russia, they do. They'll trade with you. They'll help you develop, but they're not going to mess with your politics. They want influence, right? They want you to like them so that you'll trade with them more rather than the U.S., but they're not going to infiltrate your country. They're not going to drop bombs on you. And that's pushing a lot of countries away from the unipolar system and the U.S.-dominated financial system. More and more countries are moving towards Russia and China and away from SWIFT and IMF and the World Bank. It's the birthday of JX1. No one. Oh, happy birthday. On this day, the day of reckoning, in 1906, Belgian King Leopold declared Congo as his private possession, as its owner and absolute ruler. Was that the one who would cut off people's hands and torture them for not working hard enough? I believe that was King Leopold II. Terrible person. Happy birthday, though, JX No One. Really appreciate you. You're always watching the streams, always in the chat, as is Sam Dixon. So shout out to Sam for giving a $10 super chat just so we could shout out Jay. Sam, you're awesome. You're the man. We love you. And happy birthday, Jay. There's Jay. Appreciate you too, my friend. Thanks for being here, comrades.
Worth $20 billion, which envisaged Russia's purchase of up to 500,000 barrels of Iranian oil per day in exchange for Russian products. This aimed to help alleviate the pressure imposed by sanctions on the economies of both countries. Russia has also reportedly benefited from Iranian know-how in evading international sanctions, particularly after the start of the war in Ukraine in February 2020.
They're not international sanctions. Like I said, the international financial arms like the IMF and the World Bank are controlled by the West. It's US-led sanctions. It's NATO-led sanctions. It's sanctions by the Western political establishment, the Western finance capitalists and military-industrial complex against countries that they don't like, countries who are developing themselves, countries who are threatening the US's geopolitical dominance.
Sanctions pushed both countries to cooperate more closely, to avoid isolation and to boost their economies. Russo-Iranian trade turnover has modestly but steadily increased since then, reaching more than $4 billion in 2022. Political and military cooperation of Iran has been closely intertwined with the nuclear question of Iran. For a while, it hindered closer military cooperation between the two sides. For instance, one of the consequences of Iran's refusal to stop uranium enrichment was the UN-imposed ban on selling heavy weapons to Iran.
So that was the part that pissed me off and made me realize I had to make a video about this. Which, by the way, there's a literal tank. Shout out to all the tankies out there. Yes, I do support this Chinese tank and them having it. It's also got the Soviet, or like the hammer and sickle on it. That's badass. But when they said Iran refused to stop, what did they say? Enriching uranium, right?
Refusal to stop uranium enrichment was...
Right. Iran agreed to have their nuclear program, the Iranian nuclear program, monitored 24/7 by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. And never once in the years that their nuclear program was monitored 24/7 did the IAEA say there was any evidence that Iran was creating a nuclear weapon. Zero. Zilch. Nada. So that was what the Iran deal was. Iran basically gave the U.S. everything they wanted. We had to give money back to Iran that we had stolen from them. And they would allow their nuclear program to be monitored 24/7. Now, Trump pulled out of that and drone strike Qasem Soleimani incredibly belligerently, which is one of the most imperialist things that Trump did. But Iran, for the years that the IAEA was monitoring their nuclear program, they were not accused of making a nuclear weapon. Now, there are some hardliners in Iran who are saying we need a nuclear weapon. Look at what the U.S. is doing. They just killed our general and pulled out of this deal that gave them everything they wanted. And they're threatening us and sanctioning us and stopping us from importing medicine into our country. So we should get a nuke to defend ourselves. But still, there are that's a result of U.S. belligerence. And Iran had no plans whatsoever to make a nuclear weapon. Right. And they allowed their program to be monitored all the time. Full access by the U.S. Now, Iran was enriching uranium for medical isotopes. And yeah, I studied this in my healthcare administration classes. It's actually very interesting. But the Iranian healthcare system is very advanced. It's owned by the government, as is most of their economy. It's owned by the state. And there's been a lot of investment into research and development and using the enrichment of uranium isotopes for exclusively medical purposes. And how do we know they were exclusively for medical purposes? Well, because the enrichment of uranium was being monitored 24/7 by the IAEA, right? But then the U.S. media still uses the enrichment of uranium as a reason why we need to attack Iran and do regime change in Iran and sanction Iran and destroy their medical system. They're enriching uranium for the purpose of giving people health care. And they allowed us to monitor their nuclear system, but we pulled out of that deal and then killed one of their national heroes. So the idea that Iran is being belligerent or Iran is secretly trying to make a nuclear weapon and the U.S. is just trying to contain them and support democracy is batshit and a total lie. And anybody who knows the truth knows how ridiculous that statement is. Anyone who knows that about the IAEA knows how ridiculous that is to say about Iran. But these well-produced, well-made, well-animated YouTube channels just say this stuff, and a lot of people believe it. A lot of people think they're, just getting objective facts. But these videos are always tainted with neoliberal ideology. Always. They're always through the lens of NATO and the Western State Departments and intelligence agencies. It's ridiculous. And they have 3 million subscribers. How do we defeat these guys? How do we beat them? How do we get more followers than them? Tell me, people. How do we do it? I've been using AI more lately. Is AI going to help? Is AI the answer? Can I make animations that look as good as Kings and Generals with AI? CIA YouTube channels, literally. And you know these accounts are all boosted by the bots and, you know, any way that the State Department uses to influence the algorithms. But this is one of my favorite studies to pull up because it's so revealing about this online political world that we all operate in. 60 to 80% of Twitter accounts posting about Russia and Ukraine are bots, and 90% are pro-Ukraine bots. So this is a study that was done on Twitter, but you know this is going on TikTok, this is going on YouTube, this is going on Twitch, everywhere. And this makes up a good portion, I'm sure, of the audiences of people like Vaush, and Kings and Generals and these other State Department-esque accounts. And it creates a situation similar to like how the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom influenced academia in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And to this day, you don't necessarily need to fund people directly, or you don't need to put State Department plants or CIA plants in academia, right? You can just create the conditions for opportunists to come out and get paid really well and become famous for saying pro-imperialist stuff. So similar with YouTube creators and Twitch commentators, people, you know, social media influencers. If you create a bunch of bots who will like their stuff, who will reward them with dopamine and with fame and with money for saying imperialist talking points, for giving the imperialist narrative, the pro-NATO State Department narrative, like Vaush does on his show every day. You can create a lot of commentators like that, or promote and boost a lot of commentators like that, while only supporting them indirectly. You don't have to give them direct support. You don't have to plant an influencer. You can just plant a bunch of bots who like the content of the influencers that you appreciate. Like right when the debate with Vaush got done, there was a post from Dylan Burns, like saying Vaush won the debate, and it got a bunch of likes in like 2 minutes. Like nobody actually likes Dylan Burns, right? I mean, there are people who do, but a lot of those are just these fucking bots. I'm eating Big League Chew, by the way. Not chewing tobacco. It's actually gum. It's good. It brings me back to my childhood. I'm Russian and I'm 40% bot. Do I count? I don't know. Yeah, do I count if I'm like built like a cyborg? Should read about how India conducted nuclear testing in secret after the U.S. threatened sanctions. If they followed through, the USSR refused to go along with sanctions and sided with India. Oh, very interesting. I will read that, Julie. By the way, Julie, just curious, are you the same Julie who was in the Twitch space the other day? No, sorry, Twitch space, the Twitter space. Because I've been doing those. I was on Twitter spaces for like 3-4 hours last night after the Kovalik interview. Just talking with people, talking strategy, talking organizing, and hanging out. It was super fun. I want to do it more, but there was someone from Class Unity, I believe, named Julie. No, that's not me. Okay, gotcha. Just curious. Maybe I'll do another one of those Twitter spaces tonight. It was fun. There was like people from... there were a lot of Marxist-Leninists. There are a few people from Infrared or who like Haas or Infrared or whatever. And then just a whole bunch of Midwestern Marx people and a few people from Class Unity. which is the coalition of people who left DSA under complaints of DSA not being based on class and class analysis and class struggle, and just being co-opted by the ruling class and focusing on culture war issues and pushing imperialist positions on various lines, even though a lot of the people in the rank and file of DSA are basically tankies, or at least anti-imperialists. So. Maybe I'll do another one tonight. Class Unity is awesome, by the way. Follow them because they get shit on a lot, obviously, for being awesome and for leaving DSA. But this is their Twitter account. We republished the statement that they made when they left DSA, which I'm sure a lot of people attacked them for. But Vaush attacked them for it. Oh my gosh, Vaush is such a piece of shit. When this group of people leaves DSA, this group of working class organizers, these guys are like teachers and industrial workers and like steel plant workers. They're all like working class people who are just sick of DSA. As soon as they leave and try and form a coalition based on class, they get attacked by Vaush. There's Vaush doing his job as a Fed. Literally. Like, why do they need your 2 cents, dude? You're not involved in organizing, right? You're also rich. You don't need healthcare as bad as the rest of us. But then these guys criticize DSA and they leave. In comes Vaush to attack them. How dare you just be part of DSA and keep voting Democrat, you filthy worker. I don't know. It's just so condescending, like Vaush from his ivory tower, from his freaking gaming chair. I'm going to retweet this right now. Vaush from his gaming chair talking down on these working class people who don't want to just hail the Democrats anymore, who actually want a movement based on class. Is Vaush yeah, sorry. I probably shouldn't have pulled that up on stream. I don't want to get banned. But yeah, he tried to. When I debated Vaush, I was sent a plethora of receipts and documents filled with him saying just bizarre stuff in his Discord, especially the interactions with a character named Poppy, who was in his Discord server, who Vaush was just being disgusting to. So. No. But anyways, back to Class Unity. Yeah, we republished this. They basically said independent from DSA. I'll just read it because this is worth a read. Very important to socialists who are paying attention to the movement in the U.S. and socialism in the U.S., that a coalition of working class people would break off from DSA and, criticize them openly. It's just something important that we should all be paying attention to as people who care about socialism in this country. We acknowledge the immense amount of work done by volunteer organizations of the DSA all across the U.S. Many of us continue to contribute to projects within DSA that we consider worthwhile. However, recent developments confirm that the DSA leadership has been thoroughly captured by the middle-class careerists, opportunists, and Democratic Party-adjacent political operatives. As a result, the DSA as a national political organization, along with its largest and most influential local chapters, has become an appendage of the Democratic Party and an obstacle to the formation of a true workers' party. So basically just saying DSA is tailing Democrats. And Vaush is saying, no, just keep voting Democrat. Who cares if they don't fight for health care? I already have health care from all the money I make streaming. Fucking joke of a human being. And this, I know part of what happened, or part of the reason they did this, because we had a meeting with Class Unity, is the 2018 or 2019, I think it was 2019 DNC conference, where they were doing like the jazz hands, and they were like, please don't come in here with any aggressive scents or any smells that might be disrupting to people. Like, they were just making all these crazy concessions to not hurt anyone's feelings or not trigger anyone or whatever, and it kind of turned into a disaster. That was one of the triggers that got Class Unity to leave. November 30th, the DSA, or 3 DSA reps, AOC, Cory Bush, Jamal Bowman, voted to impose on the American railroad workers a labor contract that they had democratically rejected to prohibit them from going on strike. A number of DSA chapters, caucuses, and individuals have called for the expulsion of these members, but despite the DSA's National Political Committee's recent statement, it is unlikely that these reps will face any form of discipline. So, yep, you got socialists cracking down on the striking rail workers. That was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back here. More recently, the NPC froze the activity of DSA's nascent National Tech Committee, whose purpose was to develop DSA membership portal and build alternatives to the Democratic Party electoral infrastructure, such as VAN, which is, very, this is important. Like, the electoral infrastructure that we used for the Bernie campaign was what the Democratic Party used. So there was a little app that you would download on your phone, and they would just send you to register Democrats, right? So it wasn't based on class. It wasn't about talking to working class people who would be interested in Bernie's policies or would be interested in Medicare for all. It was about talking to Democrats. So they would send us to these wealthy neighborhoods, people with like 3 cars in their garage, or like 3-car garages and giant homes. And you start talking to them about Medicare for all, and they'd be like, oh, that's socialism. I don't like that. It's like, well, what the fuck am I doing here in this luxury neighborhood? So we were always saying we need an infrastructure, an app that helps you organize working class people based on class, not just Democrats, people who have voted Democrat in the past. That was the biggest flaw of Bernie's campaign. And if you read about Bernie, right, and what he did in Vermont before he was running on the national stage, that's what he did. He went to the unions and the working class Republican people and any community organization who would listen to him and said, what do you want? I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to fight for higher wages. I'm going to fight for healthcare. I'm going to fight for public parks. I'm going to fight to get the roads redone. And he flipped a red state into a state that voted for a socialist year after year after year, because they knew Governor Bernie Sanders or Senator Bernie Sanders was going to fight for working class interests. So we got all these working class Republican people to start voting for a socialist. It's a perfect example of what socialism or what socialists could be doing all across America, and flipping red or blue states to socialist states. But instead, when he got on the national stage, he just targeted Democrats, elected Democrats, and tailored his message towards them as well, rather than a class-based message, a message based on what the people want. And now Bernie's simping for the war in Ukraine. It's just, the longer he's been in politics, the more the Democratic machine and establishment has just gobbled him up. Independent Workers' Party, captured by the bureaucracy, failed to capitalize on the current political crisis. DSA's tendency to succumb whatever is placed right in front of it eroded the potential of a long-term socialist perspective for building organs of class struggle. Left liberal activism. They say there's an irreconcilability and antagonism between left liberal activism and socialism, kind of referencing the 2019 DSA Congress there, where, left liberal ideas totally took over and prevented any kind of serious socialist organizing from going on. Creating an ambivalence towards Marxism and class politics, which has since turned outright hostility. So, yeah. Shout out to Class Unity. Follow them. I think they're on the right track. We need to make alliances with people who want a class-based, anti-imperialist movement. We need a show like Cosmos to visually popularize Marxism like Sagan did to popular science. Absolutely. Yeah. That would be awesome. We could get Neil deGrasse Tyson. Or like we could have Anthony Montero instead of Neil deGrasse Tyson. So we have a real communist legend with like a smooth voice that's fun to listen to. Talking about communism with cool graphics in the background. We just need more editors and graphic designers in general in the communist movement. Like, if we could produce videos like Kings and Generals or whatever that account was that we just listened to with those graphics and the animation, like, it just looks so nice and it makes those videos so easy to watch. Thank you so much for the $5, Sam. Look at this. We got all the colors of the rainbow here today. Multiple super chats from Sam. Multiple from Sebastian. Thank you guys so much. Mostly from Sam and Sebastian today. Got some from Ross. So thank you for all the super chats that we've received today. I really appreciate that. I'm going to call it a day for the Eddie Liger Power Hour. We've now gone well over 2 hours. So eventually one of these will actually be an hour long, I swear. But I'm sure y'all don't mind a little extra stream and a little extra content. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our moderators like Ware Pilgrim, Cobra Commander, Jacob. Thank you to our super chatters, like I just said, Sam Dixon, Ross, and Sebastian. Thank you to everyone who was hanging out in the comments. Jenny, communism is good. Soviet Commissar, Andrew Ray, JX No One. Happy birthday, JX No One. Thank you for being with us on your birthday. Lorshek Molsh. I appreciate you all so very much. I hope you have a great day. We'll play the international on our way out.
Without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.